One of our neighbors, Brian Birchfield, is a graphic designer, and he put together this poster for the exhibit Passing Through the Portals, Hollywoodland 100, the People and the Place.
And the reference to portals, obviously it was the gates, but it was also all the entries into the houses. It was a term that they used.
So let's go inside through the portal and check out the exhibit.
Moses Sherman and his brother-in-law, E.P. Clark, purchased the Hollywoodland tract from a lady named Mrs. Lord in 1905. They paid $10,000 for this. And basically, it was wild. I mean, it was steep, it was wild, there was no access. And the map here that is from 1926, it's a geology map.
We can see here that it was one of the early Spanish land grants, Rancho Providencia. And Rancho Providencia went from Hollywoodland over the Mount Lee into Burbank, and it included what is now Forest Lawn and Universal Studios. Carl Laemmle bought his Universal Studio lot from Rancho Providencia. And Providencia is Spanish for Providence, which means foresight and anticipation. So obviously the people who held the land grant knew there was a future for this land.
The city boundary started right at the historic gates here. So south of the gates was Los Angeles City. The north of it was a county, and this was up through 1924. The Hollywoodland tract was then annexed into the city.
Early on, it was called Beechwood Park, and it really got notoriety in 1916 when they had the Shakespeare Festival. It was the 300th anniversary of Shakespeare's birth, and they put on Julius Caesar, and they found that this canyon made a wonderful amphitheater, and it really was the first Hollywood Bowl. So the original tract included what was now Canyon Drive, that canyon over there, correct?
Yes, I mean, the track extended all the way to Western.
So in 1905, when they bought it, their first use was this extensive quarry for their rail line.
Between 1905 and 1923, they had a gravel quarry. We know that today as the Bronson Quarry or the Bat Caves. And a lot of the gravel taken from that site was used for the roadways in Los Angeles and Hollywood. There's a small map here that indicates how that gravel was brought down, and it was brought down by rail from that cave, or from that rather digging, to Franklin, which I find very fascinating.
Sherman and Clark, as partners, were really in the Los Angeles Pacific Railway, where they were trying to connect important parts of LA with a rail system. And there were two quarries here. There's a south quarry known as the Bat Cave. They took out tons of granite. And a north quarry.
This one was by the girls' camp, where all the Hollywoodland tract granite was taken, most of it. And then they carted it up on that, what is now a paved path, brought it to Holly Ridge. Then they had their tipple and they dumped it in and went on their merry way of developing.
So here we are with Thomas Jordan.
The genius.
I love that he became a civil engineer through correspondence course. So he was before the internet too, so you had to wait for the mail to take your courses.
Without his vision, without how he interpreted to deal with this very steep granite, we would not have this development of how these houses became so unique and special. Every lot is different.
Jordan was a city engineer. He worked on the Los Angeles Aqueduct, which was considered an engineering wonder at the time. In 1918, he left the city and started his own company, Engineering Service Corporation, ESC. It was a gamble, but it paid off really well for him.
In March of 1923, the Sherman Company, the Hollywoodland Syndicate, hired Thomas Jordan to do all the engineering. So that encompassed the tract maps, laying out the neighborhood, surveying the neighborhood, submitting the plans to the county, installing or identifying where all the curbs, gutters, roads, and utilities go. So it was the operating manual of how Hollywoodland was going to look.
In 1924, he then became part of the engineering team that built Mulholland Drive.
And Mulholland Highway starts in Hollywoodland and goes all the way to the Pacific.
I love the pen and ink advertising that was done for Hollywoodland. It was done within the tract office, and the advertising manager was L.J. Burrid. This early advertisement of 1923 shows the first tract house, and it's the Tracy Schultz Company. Tracy Schultz was the original developer. Woodruff worked under him, and Tracy Schultz died in this office. What was the date?
We have a letter here, a copy. Last letter to Schultz. He died the next day, June 3rd, 1923, in this office.
So after his heart attack, it threw everybody into chaos, and then that allowed Woodruff to step up and be the main guy, huh?
Yeah.
To run it all.
Moses Sherman provided the image and the what he kind of wanted to see in this beautiful hillside neighborhood. Moses Sherman had gone to Europe in around 1910 for a two-year tour around the world. And I'm guessing he came back with some visual ideas that he wanted to implement in this tract of land that he had owned since 1905.
And next to him is Woodruff on King the Horse at Sunset Ranch Stables, which was the Hollywoodland Stables at the time.
And that barn, historic barn, exists today.
So we read here that in 1918 he was sued for fraud, but obviously the charges didn't stick.
We have a series of letters back and forth between Harry Chandler and Moses Sherman. These were from the Sherman Library and Gardens. They had this ongoing relationship. They had many real estate investments, and it's kind of interesting how they lamented about S.H. Woodruff and how annoying he was.
So when did they fire Woodruff?
There's a series of letters back and forth. They kept saying, "Show us your books for Hollywoodland," and he refused to share them with their accountant. I've seen a ledger sheet, and we have some examples of it from 1930, and must have been at that point that they figured he had been taking additional money. He was a salaried employee, and then he was taking an additional cut every time he sold a lot. So, sometimes he'd sell those lots a couple times and then didn't report stuff. I believe that's when he was canned.
And here we have a section of Delario renderings. He was the architect of the tract. So if you wanted to build a house, he was almost probably the first one you went to, because he was across the street here in the building that had the drugstore. He was upstairs.
Well, he designed the village. He designed the whole Beechwood market side, as well as the real estate tract office that we're standing in now. He definitely had a vision. It wasn't just Spanish. He did the Norman, he did a variety of styles, but he would take sites that were really difficult sites, and he executed them in the most artistic and unique way. This was one example, that it had a turntable. You come down the driveway, the turntable turned your car around after you entered the garage, and you came back up.
Here we have photographs of some Delario homes, because the people who live in it are very proud to be Delario homeowners.
And some of our beautiful, it goes from mansions to little cottages. Types. Yeah. Let's take a look at our people that live here.
Friends at the Beechwood Market. These are the employees over the years. Beechwood Market's been here in the canyons since 1933.
It speaks to how they had this vision for the neighborhood too. You have a centralized place where people can shop and commune with, and then you drive up to your home. It was a complete unity in living.
And then we have some blueprints too, the houses that went up in the tract.
And this was particularly interesting because this particular house was, the plans were not approved. We had 50-year deed restrictions, and they were not approved because of that flat roof over the garage, and they were concerned that umbrellas would be put on there. Oh my goodness.
Huh.
So
Silly.
subsequently it was approved, but we have all the
Is this the documentation about how they didn't approve the house?
correct.
And
yeah.
where is this house? On what
This
street?
is on Beechwood, right before Ledgewood. And two very interesting people were the original owners.
C. Bakalennikov was a very well-known conductor of the LA Philharmonic and conducting orchestras at the Egyptian Theater, the Criterion Theater, the Mayan Theater, and even the Chinese Theater. His wife, Fritzi Ridgway, was a silent movie star. She made her film debut in 1916 and appeared in 63 films between 1916 and 1934. She was a horsewoman. Frederick Russell Burnham.
He worked with the original Boy Scout person. He was a fascinating man. He was an Indian Scout. Came from Iowa.
He was in the Boer Wars.
Pony Express, and made it big finally after doing some mineral research, and he ended up working for, I think, Standard Oil.
His letters to his wife and about building the house and to his friends is really quite interesting.
Yeah. For this house that Jean Pinatero grew up with, her father helped build it with Mr. Christ. We have several Christ houses in the neighborhood. The very first house was a Christ house. Jean came to our 75th and shared lots of information.
And down here at your correspondence.
Yes, her correspondence.
Jean Pinatero's.
Yes, to me, to Mr. Chris, but you can see by this brochure that he had, it's a copy, of the various beautiful houses and structures that he built throughout Los Angeles County.
And here are letters and greetings. This was for the 75th. A lot of people sent greetings to Hollywoodland. This is really fun.
And what was so wonderful about this is that these people were alive. They lived here originally in Hollywoodland, so it was kind of special to have them. Certainly they're not here 25 years later, but they all had fond memories of Hollywoodland.
People would mean all the neighbors, all the people in the last 100 years who lived in Hollywoodland. And this is a wonderful display of people who contributed to the exhibit because they were so happy to be in this neighborhood. Here we have Vance Otis, who was a stalwart for years, Hollywoodland resident. I love this Hollywood Hilltopper magazine.
That was from our friend Trudy Cooney. Came here after World War II. She suffered under Nazi rule in the Netherlands.
Here's Joanne.
Joanne's been a great supporter of Hollywoodland.
Her neighbor, Carlos Denise, architect, renderer. He did rendering of homes from architect's drawings. Real talented man. And he did this because she said her house was an eyesore, so he helped her fix up the facade. Here she is with her husband.
Yes.
And here's just a tribute to our neighbor. We loved her. She passed away this last year, Jean Clyde Mason. Wonderful woman.
And she was so dedicated to Hollywoodland, so artistic, and she left us with many memories. She was in the Wall Street Journal with her vintage car. Oh gosh, we used to take that vintage car down to City Hall when we had protests and stuff. People would notice us then. You know, it was an eye catcher. It was such fun.
And here's her artwork.
Yeah, all of her crazy cards that she sent me. And
her house overlooking the village.
She loved that village look. She always would tell me it was so European looking from her windows, and it is.
Yeah, and she helped fund this lighting of the gates.
And they look so beautiful, so come by in the evening sometime.
Well, there's so many more stories to cover, but we'll end right now on the portals. Happy birthday, Hollywoodland.
Happy birthday.